How's it going, everybody? This is Cameron White with White Light Astrology, giving you guys your September 2019 horoscope for Aries, Sun, and Rising. Thank you guys so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys, and I'm so glad that you can be here today. This month, we're starting it off with Mars conjoining the Sun in Virgo. Now, Mars is the planet of action and drive and in our intentions as well as Mars is a malefic planet. It brings problems like fights and angers and frustrations. While Mars is in the sign of Virgo, this looks like acting out more specifically, being more dialed in and tuned into the details, our schedules, our routines, whatever is more tangible. And while Mars conjoins the Sun, this is when Mars is kind of getting purified in energy and Mars is kind of getting a little refresher and being put into the light. Now, what's important about this is that this is a refreshing energy of, being able to tackle and accomplish and detail. But this is also Mars, where can you find yourself getting lost and confused into the details and getting frustrated with the tiny things. I think Mars conjoining the Sun beginning this month off is kind of like giving us a fresh, like a starting point with where to put our energy and where to direct ourselves at. Then 2 days later, on September 3rd, we'll have Mercury conjoin the Sun and go Cazimi. And this is important too because this is Mercury's home sign of Virgo. This is, our words, our thoughts put into paper and into, actual language. This is being specific. This is being concise. And while Mercury is conjoining the Sun, this is the same energy as being refreshed, being more understanding, having a clear mindset, and being able to kind of see the details a little bit better. Now, both this Mars and Mercury conjunction to the Sun is happening in Virgo, so it's happening in your 6th house. The 6th house has to do with your work, your routine, your behaviors, and your habits. This has to do with your health and what needs to get focused on here. So while Mars and Mercury conjoin the Sun for the first couple days of September, this really looks like, where do you need to put more energy and attention of detail into your habits, your work routine, and your health, and what needs to be cared for here. Then on September 4th, 7th, and 10th, we're going to talk about this little trifecta we've got going on. We have Venus opposing Neptune, then Mercury opposing Neptune, and then the Sun opposing Neptune. And Venus right now is in Virgo, and she is in her fall, where Venus doesn't really work too well in this sign. Venus wants to enjoy things, and Venus is kind of forced to look at the specifics here. And while Venus is in your 6th house, Venus is trying to find more joy into the, work that she's doing, or wanting to find more value into the specifics of your health, of your routine, and your schedule. But while Venus opposes Neptune, it can be easy to get a little bit foggy over what exactly you need versus what exactly you don't need. And it can be easy to kind of blur the lines between those two and get overwhelmed with all of the details. But as Mercury opposes Neptune 2 days later on the 7th, that is when things start to become a little bit more clear and you can kind of pierce through Neptune's veil and kind of see things the way that they need to be seen. Then on September 10th, when the Sun opposes Neptune, this is kind of like bringing that energy into light, When you change your mindset about something, it ends up, changing your perception on a lot of other things. And so while Venus, Mercury, and Neptune and the Sun all oppose Neptune, I think this is just kind of like really looking at your schedule, really looking at your health, really looking at your habits and, where you're employed, where you give the most time to and going, what do I need to focus on here? What are my needs? And how clearly am I really seeing this situation? This is a good time to really write everything down in bullet points and to get, as clear as possible. Then on September 13th is when Mercury conjoins Venus in Virgo. And this is pretty positive because Mercury is in its home sign right now where it's, basically it can do whatever it wants. And this is Mercury, the planet of communication, our thoughts, our communication, our thoughts, our mindset, and what we're really thinking about. And while Venus is in Virgo, it can kind of like, struggle a little bit with the over analyzing of the details and, kind of like putting too much into one thing. Mercury conjoining Venus is kind of like Mercury speaking this message of Venus of kind of like, hey, where are you enjoying yourself in these tiny details? And I keep using the word tiny details because that can look like a lot of different things. But when we're talking about your 6th house of your work and your routine, your day-to-day habits, it is the smaller things that accumulate to make the bigger picture. And so while Mercury conjoins Venus, I think this is Mercury kind of being like, hey, Venus, take a look around. There's a lot that you can put more value and emphasis to if you choose to, because maybe it is worth of something for you. Also on September 13th, we have the full moon in Pisces, and I think this is really going to be the kind of hitting point for you guys where it starts to make a little bit more sense because this full moon in Pisces is happening in your 12th house. The 12th house is about repressed and unacknowledged parts of ourselves, where we're hidden from other people, hidden enemies, isolation, alienation for healing purposes. And this full moon, I think, is going to bring this light up in your 12th house and kind of go, hey, what are you repressing and not acknowledging and maybe needing? This is the sign of Pisces. This has to do with the blending together of emotions and thoughts. And so during this full moon on the 13th, I think this is about looking at what do you really need, and that's looking specific to you. And at that time is when you could start feeling a little bit more clear about how you can apply what you need to do for what your needs are. Then the next day on September 14th, while Mercury and Venus are still conjunct each other or conjoining each other, they will be both ingressing into Libra, into your 7th house. So now we have the planet of communication, our ideas and our thoughts, as well as the planet of love, value, beauty, bringing things together. This is pretty positive. While Mercury is still speaking this message of Venus, Venus goes from her sign of fall to her sign of domicile, where we're going to Venus's territory now, and Venus can be more expressive. And this is going into your 7th house of relationships, of other people and one-on-one relationships, whether it's, casual, professional, or, personal. However, as Venus and Mercury both enter your 7th house, looks like a lot more value being attracted with other people, and a lot more balance in, as well as, I don't want to say just communication with other people, but being able to express, whether that's other people expressing their value for you, or you expressing your value to other people. Venus is bringing you together with more individual relationships this month. But then also on September 14th is when Mars opposes Neptune. And while Mars is in Virgo, where Mars is wanting to be decisive and acute and specific to know the measurements and everything like that, and can kind of it needs the paperwork, it needs the data in order to do anything. While Mars opposes Neptune, this is kind of being able to decipher, what's fact and what's fiction, and being able to see, what exactly you're doing and what exactly, benefits that's giving you versus what it's not giving you. And as Neptune's in your 12th house in Pisces, where it's kind of the subconscious part of yourself's kind of like a big blur right now, Mars opposing it is kind of giving you a little bit of clarity with direction on what you can do to kind of still, make some positive adjustments and make some positive behavior changes with yourself, but not exactly get overwhelmed with the idea of everything needs to change and that everything's bad. It's kind of hey, this is good, you can do this, and you're available to do it right now, so why don't you do it? Then on September 18th, Saturn finally stations direct. Saturn's been retrograde for quite some time, and Saturn stations are actually pretty important. You could definitely feel the vibe switch between it. And as Saturn has been in your 10th house of your career and your workplace, your boss, your public image, it could be a little bit harsh right now. But as Saturn moves direct in the middle of being trined by, Mars, Venus, Mercury, all that stuff, this looks like setting a little bit more foundation and having a little bit more discipline, a little bit more authority within your career and your workplace. What actions have you taken on to build up more security and have more authority in your career and your workplace? As Saturn stations direct, this is definitely kind of, seeing that responsibility get handed down. However, Saturn isn't always necessarily fun. Saturn is very constructive, so this is going to be a constructive thing for your career, but Saturn is a malefic planet, so it is still bringing restrictions, limitations, discipline to yourself. And as Saturn moves direct in your 10th house, this is kind of knowing what responsibilities to take, because now the limitations and the walls and the barriers are clear. But now as Saturn's moving direct, this is kind of facing those walls and going and overcoming those obstacles by learning what you had to discipline yourself with as Saturn was retrograde for the past few months. Then on September 21st, the 21st night of September, we have Jupiter squaring Neptune exactly. Now, this has kind of been going on all year, but the exact square after Jupiter's now direct, and it's going to hit it again for the last time, is on September 21st, and I think that this is important because I've been talking about this on and off all year, and this is Jupiter squaring Neptune is kind of understanding the truth and seeing what else is out there in order to unmystify and unblur the blurry and the mystified. And as Jupiter makes this superior square to Neptune, this is kind of having optimism prevail, this optimistic truth, this optimistic idea prevail over the confusion and the shadow, over what can be and over we don't really know what's going on. Jupiter right here is saying, this is your truth, this is what you need to see. And this is in your 9th house. This is about your beliefs, your sense of spirituality, far distance travel, foreign languages, higher education, publishing. And Jupiter right here is speaking a message of opportunity and optimism. And I think while Jupiter's squaring Neptune, this is kind of eliminating a lot of the fear of the unknown from the ways that you want to expand yourself in that area. So take heed of that, because I think that that's going to be an important factor this month. Then on September 23rd, we have the Sun ingressing into Libra, and Libra season begins. And what's important about this is that as you guys are Aries, that is the exalted sign of the Sun. The Sun going into Libra is going into its sign of fall, where the daylight gets shorter. We hit the fall equinox. However, as the Sun goes into Libra, this is taking the light from, harvesting our, fruit and taking all of that stuff and kind of counting it out and sorting it out. The Sun in Libra is kind of like balancing things out, being able to gracefully fall rather than just, falling in style versus just hitting the floor. Then on September 25th is when Venus squares Saturn. Now, I wasn't really sure if I wanted to talk about this, but I do think it's important because Venus square Saturn is usually one of the more rougher transits. But right now, Venus is in your 7th house. She's in her domicile. Venus is feeling really, really good at this time, and she's bringing value to your relationship. She's bringing harmony. She's bringing connection. She's bringing joy to the people that you surround yourself with on the individual level. But as Venus squares Saturn, this is kind of like going, hey, Venus, you're over here having a great time in this relationship world, but it's causing an issue, and there's a problem with this in the career aspect. While Saturn is in Capricorn in your 10th house, where, maybe if you're retired or something, this just still has to do with your public figure, how everyone kind of sees you. While Venus is squaring it, it's kind of like, where do you need to establish more value and establish more, not necessarily just value in terms of, oh, this person's great, I love this person, but in the sense of like, hey, I value this relationship. What rules, what, disciplines do we need to enact in order to keep this relationship healthy? Because Venus squaring Saturn, it's kind of like your work might get in your way of enjoying these relationship opportunities that you have. And so it's kind of like, how do you find this balance between, having to deal with what responsibilities have been given to you at work or in the bigger life picture, but still being able to enjoy the people that you love. And then on September 28th, we end the month off with the new moon in Libra. And, this is pretty exciting because as this new moon in Libra is happening in your 7th house of relationships, this is about really looking at and bringing the two luminaries, the sun and the moon, giving it attention to your 7th house. And this is kind of like, hey, where do you need to find more balance of working with other people, having better relationship? You guys are Aries risings or Aries suns. I'm not saying you can't be independent, but where can you work a little bit more on relating with other people and working together with other people? And I think this new moon is just a big opportunity to really look at the relationships you have in your life and also look at which ones are worth valuing and which ones aren't really worth working on anymore. While this is squaring Saturn in Capricorn here is kind of like, hey, there's a certain agenda that needs to get done. And if you're going to, let yourself be used by relationships, maybe that's not the right relationship for you. And that's basically how we end September. And I think this is going to be an extremely powerful month because all of this stuff in Virgo is being specific, it's being action oriented. And I think that this is going to eventually lead us to some really powerful times once we get to December and everything like that. But with that being said, thank you guys so much for being here and liking and sharing and commenting and subscribing. I love and appreciate every single one of you guys, and I'll be seeing you next month.